We're at the next stage of this build now, and that is inlay. Inlay with a difference. I say inlay with a difference because it's not going to be entirely inlaid. Now we have the Crimson Guitars logo, and it always helps to print out your logo or whatever you're going to inlay beforehand, especially if it is geometric in any way. And the beautiful thing about masking tape is that often it is semi-transparent. I'm going to hold that up to a light, and my edge lines up, and finally, with a lovely little scalpel blade, I'm going to finalize the layout, or sorry, the position of this inlay. You probably can't actually see it in that light, but that's there. So now that I've got that, I can go back For some reason this reminds me of my sister. When we were young, I was cutting with a scalpel blade, doing some sort of project, and I must have been about 9 or 10, and she came up behind me and kicked me in the leg, and I slit that fingernail in half entirely, down to the the fingernail fell off. I bled rather a lot that day. Moral of the story: don't have your finger in the line. You never know who's going to come up behind you and kick you. So, jeweler's saw. We've got our jeweler's saw, and I almost gently, because you can't really cut anything without being, well, you're cutting, aren't you? Anyhow, I am going to cut my logo out. And there we go. Despite the finesse that you can achieve with a jeweler's saw, you do need to go over all of your lines with little jeweler's files, I suppose, just to make sure you have perfection. Now, positioning is, of course, well, rather important. And I'm going to line this up using the tuner positions. I'm not going to bother trying to estimate exactly where the strings are going to go. I'm just going to draw these lines. Now obviously I'm lining it up with the side of the hole and squaring it up with the nut. There we go. Now, if I have worked it out properly, in other words, if these holes are in the right place, then that there should be centered on where the strings are. And fingers crossed that is the case. Thinking about it, I could just have drawn those two and I would know. How silly. I'm obviously also thinking about the size of the washer and all of that. But I suspect I'm in the right place now. So, the time has come for a scalpel. A fresh blade goes on the scalpel. And I'm now going to triple check myself. Point of no return. Now if you draw around your inlay with a pencil and then cut out, your cavity will be either too big or too small. More likely than not too big, because you've got the width of pencil lines. And even if you're using a clutch pencil, it's not ideal. This I am cutting right on the edge of my inlay. And that means that if I recess it to this point, I will have a cavity that is exactly the right size. If anything, I'm going to have a cavity that is a little bit too small. And as when we were routing the neck, a little bit too small is a good thing. There we go. So that's that. And the nice thing is, once you've got your initial line cut, if you hold your blade at a fairly low angle to the original cut, your blade should follow your cut relatively easily. Obviously, wood being wood and having a grain, every now and then that causes issues. But that's why we work with wood, isn't it? You wouldn't want to have a love affair with somebody that was entirely 100% predictable. Or would you? Huh. There we go. Several cuts. And that is marked out and ready for recessing. And I'm not going to be recessing it all the way because I want my inlay to stand proud of the headstock. Now, Well, I'm going to cut that out by hand, I suspect. I could pre-route that a little bit with a small router, but the fretboard end gets in the way, and quite frankly I can't be bothered to put a couple of veneers in there to raise the edge. I'm going to find that looks sharp but it doesn't feel sharp. Let's find another one. I'm just going to cut this by hand. None of my chisels feel sharp. I am going to leave this for now, go and sharpen some tools, and come back. It's probably going to take longer than building that up and using a router, but what the hell. This is what tools are for, sharpening. So I've gone away and sharpened a couple of chisels. As you can see, a properly sharp tool has to have a mirror surface at both sides. And well, I've done several videos on how to sharpen, or at least how I think I should sharpen, and you can go and watch those if you like. This now is doing what I wanted it to do. Now this is called cut to cut. You've made a cut with your scalpel blade, and now you are cutting at an angle to that same cut, to the bottom of that cut, sorry. And that means that where it meets, the material will clear away, and you end up with the finish that you want. So when your angled cut meets up with the cut that you made with your scalpel blade, the material falls away following a nice straight line, or whatever line you are trying to achieve, and then it's a relatively simple task to clear away the center, which is effectively just waste. And throughout this process, depending on how deep you need to make your cavity, you go back with the scalpel blade just to reiterate your line. And I don't need a particularly deep cavity in this case. Cut to cut, just like that. So that cavity is now perfect. Now remember that I'm wanting this logo to be raised. I could have just glued it to the headstock, but that seems a little bit less custom guitar than it should be. I don't know. It's one or the other. I felt like inlaying it, so I did. Now the next stage obviously is to re-sand around that area and get rid of all these marks, just because once it's glued in it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get in there. I'm just sanding down the sides of the inlay outlay. It has an identity crisis. The final stage, a couple of small drops of super glue. I really don't want it to splurge out the edges. And there we have it. that inlay, outlay, custom whatever it's called, is in and done and dusted and upside down. There we go. Some more engraving later, but for now I'm going to set it aside and let it cure.